Dig the kinetic. Kinetic aesthetic.
Oh, let's see what the poll says here. Oh. Alright, let's move into the early 2000s, shall we? Oh, finally a game I can actually recommend to people. When I was a little kid, my experience with video games was usually in the form of some second-hand experience. I was always watching someone play something or another, and gaming for me was usually relegated to simple CD-ROM games. It wasn't until I was around 5 years old that I had received the first game that I could really say was meant for me. You know, the one about the Master Thief. Wait, no, we're talking about the furry version. It actually took me a really long time to realize that Sly Cooper was something of an homage to Lupin III. I really only started to watch anime once I got into my early teens, but it took me even longer to start watching some Lupin content. As soon as I did, a million little lights and bells went off in my head, and I was like, wait, how much did Sly Cooper take from this? You've got the setup of this incredibly talented and charismatic thief that comes from a long line of master thieves, who putters around with his two friends that each have their own skills. You've got an inspector that seems hell-bent on capturing the thief, but we all know as an audience that they just want to fuck his brains out. This sense of the devs being inspired by more adult pieces of media to make a family-friendly game shows itself in entertaining ways. While it's still an E-rated kids game, the main source of humor that keeps me laughing even today is the kind of juxtaposition of cartoon characters being talked about with this slightly detached seriousness or darkness.
Oh my god, a green waterfall overflowing with bones and body parts!
You play as a kid whose father was murdered by a group of wildly different anthropomorphic animals, and it's all played relatively straight, but you can tell they're still having a lot of fun with it. It's not as aggressive with its early 2000s edginess as something like Invader Zim.
My spine!
But it still has that vibe that the creators were inspired or familiar with a lot of adult content before making it.
Now see, a girl whose best friend's a firearm's got issues.
It's one of those cases where if the game was about real people living in a realistic setting, the stuff that happens in the game would probably warrant a T or an M rating, because it's essentially the children's mascot platformer equivalent of Kill Bill. On top of that, the game starts out in its introductory segments with this kind of iconic early 2000s turquoise look that was in a ton of shit at the time, like Atlantis or Sons of Liberty. As soon as you start stepping into the first hub world of the game, there's this great trick that the game does in order to build up the zone's respective antagonist, where you always get an intercom message from whatever villain runs the zone.
So from now on, greet any visitors you see with a hail of landing. Capiche?
Hey there, Sly Cooper! That's right, I know you're here. I've seen it in the stars. It's all over my tea leaves.
Attention, valued employee. Sadly, incompetech elect not to pay for avalanche protection service. And so I am forced to bury alive under many tons of snow.
It took me quite a long time to really appreciate Kevin Blackton's presence in this game.
I hate unexpected guests!
It took me a really long time to realize that he actually played 4 out of the 5 members of the Fiendish Five, and I think the reason is because each of the performances are just different enough in terms of accents and delivery that it can sometimes be hard to tell for somebody who isn't already aware.
You break into my place, steal my stuff, trash the joint. I feel transgressed and violated. Let's rock!
He's not necessarily on the same level as Mel Blanc when it comes to range or anything, but all of the voice performances are so pitch perfect that I feel comfortable saying that the Rogues Gallery in this game could rival some of the villains in the Metal Gear Solid franchise.
And if any of you let him get his hands on that key, I'll personally flog the lot of you for an entire fortnight!
Every performance, either heroes or villains, drips with this kind of personality and attitude.
I've calculated the trajectory of these rockets, and I'm 99% sure you'll be able to ride them all the way to the top of that statue before they explode.
What about that other 1%?
Well, in that case, Sly, you will be blown to bits. But the experience will no doubt be spectacular.
Nice.
In the later Sly games, Kevin Miller really ramps up the suave, sarcastic aspects of Sly.
I haven't stolen anything. Yet.
But in the first game, he mostly just leaves the sweet talk for the inspector.
Hey, you know, that bazooka really brings out the color of your eyes. Very fetching.
Most of the time, Sly speaks in this really whispery voice, kind of like a kid trying not to get caught.
Rain or shine, I'm gonna steal my family's book back. And if Raleigh gets in my way, it's on.
And it makes sense because this is really the first major event Sly has ever done with his teammates. One of the more common pieces of criticism I sometimes hear about the first game is that the people who are more familiar with the team's chemistry in the later games are often put off with how the team can sometimes bicker or feel lesser in terms of their importance compared to the sequels.
To do that without getting electrocuted, you'd have to destroy that power generator. And to do that, you'd need 2 more of Raleigh's treasure keys, which are heavily guarded.
Interesting. So when are you gonna get to the impossible part?
Fine, but I warned you.
But the fact that they all feel like young adults going on the most dangerous mission possible really shows itself in their performances, and is easily one of my favorite aspects of the game when it comes to character writing. Matt Olson's Bentley is a nervous wreck for a lot of the game.
I found a way up to Raleigh's hideout, but unfortunately, it is doomed to failure.
You're not gonna tell me I have to shoot myself out of that cannon.
I'm afraid that's the only way.
Now you're talking.
You're really scaring me, man.
And he's essentially the Otacon to Sly's Solid Snake, usually being there to explain certain bits of game mechanics or information on the villain's plans to Sly.
Serves that cop right.
It ends up creating a really great contrast sometimes because the fact that they're on a serious mission in a world that runs on cartoon logic is easily where some of the funniest stuff in the game comes from.
That ghost over there contacted me on Spectre Wave Radio, and we've cut a deal. He's promised us a key if you can whack 50 chickens. I guess he needs them to make a big pot of gumbo, but he's scared of the bob-toting roosters.
There's a level where you have to run over schools of piranha in order to get oil for a flame-throwing swamp skiff, and a level where you're in a computer smashing contest against a pack of giant lava slugs. There's even a couple of racing levels where you play as Murray that both start with him just wanting to get food from a local stand until he's harassed by a gang of crazy racers.
Well, I drove to this hot dog stand for a quick snack, and the next thing you know, I'm getting challenged to a race by these gangster dogs!
Chris Murphy's portrayal of Murray is definitely the most jarring compared to the later games, because in Sly 2 and 3, he's this pretty well-rounded character. Haha. But in this one, he's treated as this kind of dim-witted oaf that needs to be looked after. Again, if you played this game after playing the later games, it would easily feel like a spit in the face, because in the later games he has some genuinely great character and gameplay moments. But here...
Ed Murray, part-time driver and full-time burden.
Is that how you treat your friends, Sly?
Where's my old friend?
This doesn't necessarily mean that he's not an entertaining character, though. His fucking yelps and gasps during the turret levels are burned into my brain because they're really fucking funny.
Hey! No! Oh no! Hey!
And once again, his performance is perfect for what they're going for within the context of the game.
And don't forget you got me at the wheel, Sly!
Every character is made memorable in some way or another. Roxana Ortega's Carmelita acts like she knows the most about any given situation, but in reality she's really just oblivious to the larger picture, and is always picking up the Cooper Gang's scraps after every zone. It's kind of bold for a piece of children's media to basically say, if you want to catch the real villains, it's best you don't do it the way cops do it.
Open your eyes, detective. These quaint temples are a front for an illegal explosives factory.
Don't try to confuse the issue. You criminals are all the same, and none of you can escape justice.
On a side note, I always loved how tabloidy the newspapers are at the end of every chapter cutscene, when the cops come in and take all the credit.
The production of zombies, made illegal in the World Peace Accord of 71, earned Ms. Ruby a life sentence behind bars.
Carmelita always ends up with this high and mighty attitude because of all the fame she's getting, but at the end of the day she's secretly simping for Sly. You occasionally get these little in-engine cutscenes of a back and forth between Sly and whoever he's going up against next, and throughout the PS2 trilogy I've always found the awkward puppet mouths to be super charming.
Alright.
The cutscenes in general are actually really charming. In the later games they go for a thicker outlined comic book cartoon kind of style, but in this one they're all defined by this very basic combination of shapes and hard colors to create these kinds of rough designs for the characters. It can be easy to see them as kind of rudimentary if you're more familiar with the later Sly games, but the consistent look of the cutscenes here gives this really scrappy look that highlights the simplicity of the game's story and gameplay.
The road trip gave me the time I needed to study up on the Panda King.
At the start of every zone, you're given a little bio introduction section of Sly reading a piece of his case file in order to introduce the next villain, and all the while you see this little Indiana Jones-esque representation of the van traveling to the next location at the bottom of the screen. It's a nice touch, and all the while the music is setting the tone for the next zone. Oh, speaking of...
Show your bling and let me shine you.
When discussing the music in the franchise, eyes usually point towards the quality work done in the sequels, and I totally get it. Peter McConnell uses more natural instrumentation, and it sounds more cinematic and refined than the first game. But Ashif Hakik's music from the first game is raw as fuck. There's little motifs for each zone of the game that play. And most levels have at least 2 versions of the track that can play. One for regular gameplay, one for enemy encounters, and even some for sneaking. It allows the soundtrack to shift dynamically to suit the intensity of the level, and it's less concerned about sounding like natural instruments, focusing more on early 2000s sounding electronic tunes, atmospheric drones, little themed bits, and the occasional hip-hop beat. It's very simple at times, and it's a lot more stereotypically video game soundy than the later games, but once again the rest of the game complements this. You go through these bite-sized levels, picking up coins that give you extra chances and lives. Every enemy can kill you in one hit if you don't have the Mario mushroom equivalent, and each level ends with you collecting a key that you can use to eventually unlock your way to the zone's boss fight. The simplicity allows the gameplay on offer to be really polished, to the point where I feel confident saying that these games might have my favorite jumping mechanics of all time. The way Sly can prop himself up on any kind of corner or ledge creates a system where it's incredibly easy to make precise jumps and land exactly where you want to land. It's a video game-ass video game, and instead of trying to pretend it's not a silly video game, it incorporates it into the dark, absurdist tone and nature of the story in a way that really doesn't seem as jarring as it would in a more grounded universe. Even if some of it starts to seem a little too out there, the game itself is only around 4 hours on a standard run, so the bread doesn't get stale because it always gets eaten in a couple of sittings. It might seem really short for somebody just interested in beating the game and nothing else, but it's a game that, aside from a bit of repetition in terms of level structure, doesn't want to waste the player's time. It's all killer, no filler. I suppose that's the reason I'm sometimes indecisive on whether or not I like this game better than Sly 2, because they're both games that have different priorities in terms of gameplay and story. The first game is a very efficient and simple action platformer, with some gimmick levels here and there, and the sequel is this huge 10 to 15 hour mission-based game with 8 different hub worlds about the Sly gang, going up against this worldwide syndicate of drug lords. Sorry, spice traders.
Spice operation. Spice for the Claw Gang. Spice!
It's got a lot more content, and a lot of it does feel more polished than some of the stuff in the first game, but I also think that there's more risk of the formula stretching itself thin over its runtime. The Sly games aren't perfect. There's a few missions in each Sly game that are weaker than the others, but even the less enjoyable missions in Sly 1 only last a couple of minutes on a successful run, whereas some of the longer missions in the later Sly games can sometimes last around 20 to 30 minutes. I was never a huge fan of the last hub world in Sly 2, and I still have nightmares from my childhood about doing that mugshot plane hangar invasion mission over and over from Sly 3. The games in the Sly trilogy have somewhat predictable structures to their gameplay and zones, but there's a big difference between a 4-hour game and a 15-hour one. While I usually tend to prefer longer games, at the end of the day, all that matters is that the content within the game's runtime is worth playing. There are some games that only last a few hours that I go back to every couple of years to play, because experiencing them is like experiencing a good movie. It does what it means to do within its time, and it's short enough that replaying it after a little while isn't really an intimidating idea. The first Sly game has always been like that for me, with the second game being something I treat myself to every 4 or 5 years. For me, they're both the best game in the series, depending on what mood I'm in.
Whoa!
I suppose I have some bias around that though. Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus was the game that essentially taught me how to play video games. The game as a whole can seem pretty easy for folks who have been playing video games for a while, but for little Wendy, this shit was Demon Souls. I still have vivid memories of playing levels like the first boss fight, or the first racing section, or seeing Ms. Ruby's compound for the first time, because they're pretty much the video game equivalent of me learning how to ride a bicycle. It's a game that I could beat in an afternoon nowadays, but as a kid it took me quite a long time to get through, and because of that, I have fond memories of pretty much every level in the game. I love the way the icons of the coins change depending on what zone you're in, and these bees and rats in the first zone that you can splat into green goo if you manage to catch them. I love this little trick you can do with the dart barrel, where you can get it burnt for the entire level. And I love how over-the-top Priscilliana Esperolini's performance as Miss Ruby is.
I see your mouth moving, but all I hear is blah, blah, blah.
You know what I don't love? The way they fucked with the music in the remastered version.
Any food in the store?
Piracy.
Over the years, piracy has become an essential practice in terms of preserving culture and media, especially when it comes to video games. Imagine going into a record or a video store and seeing a copy of Terminator 2 and taking it up to the counter, and the person at the counter's like, "Do you have a Betamax tape player to run this movie?" And you're like, "No." And they're like, "Sorry, that's literally the only legal way to watch it. Hope you enjoy your collector's item." That's what legally playing video games is like, especially for older pieces of gaming. Would you rather spend $500 to play a couple of games on a console that's beyond outdated, or would you rather emulate it for free? I can tell you right now, I would have never been able to cover the original SMT games if it wasn't for emulation and dedicated fan translators. Atlas can wake me up in June when SMT5 Vengeance comes out, but I doubt they're going to be releasing improved English translated versions of the first two games anytime soon, if at all. Video games are quickly being seen as one of the most disposable and dismissible types of media on the planet. Subscription plans, digital downloads, and limitations on accessibility and shareable physical media is slowly creating an environment where games aren't something you can just buy and own, but buy and eventually throw out, like a fucking candy bar or a big bag of rice. Big game companies treat games like they would a generation of fucking iPhones or something, where you eventually just give up the games you like in order to replace them with a newer generation of video games. I swear, if I see one more reboot of a game that just has the exact same name as the original,
there will be fucking murders.
Every once in a while you get a remaster released with some of the more well-regarded games from a particular generation being brought to a newer console or optimized for newer PC operating systems, but even with all these enhancements, it can sometimes just be a version that's objectively worse than the original. While Sanzaru did a really good job at porting Sly 2 and 3 over to the PS3, it's obvious from both Sly 4 and the remastered trilogy as a whole that they focus more attention on the sequels than they did the original. It does that very sinful thing that certain remasters do, where instead of doing their best to clean up the audio for the original music tracks, they decide to add bits of unnecessary instrumentation and editing to the tracks in order to make them sound better. Stop adding those stupid horns. This is a kid's game, don't be getting horny in front of the kids.
One of my favorite instruments, listen to that.
The most infamous example of this is during the boss fight with Ms. Ruby, which has a rhythm-based fight in the original game, but with the new out-of-sync mixes of the original tracks, it either removes sections of music or fucks up the timing so bad that it's actually easier to play with the music off. It takes a fun, challenging highlight from the original and turns it into this awkward, dysfunctional chore. Thankfully, the quality of the visual design doesn't suffer from any real issues due to the remaster. From a glance, the individual elements can seem a little rough, but it's in the blending of every element where the game really shines. It kind of does that modern game thing where there's a lot of particles in the air like snow or rain or bits of lights, and the color palettes of each zone differ from one another but have just enough visual similarities in terms of design and texture work that they all seem like part of a single artistically cohesive world. Sound effects also have this kind of lo-fi, crunchy punch to them. There's always a big smack noise whenever you take out a guard, and that weird sound that the coins make when you pick them up is a permanent memory. The little noise when you get all the clue bottles is up there too. There's these weird enemies that shoot their heads at you in the Ms. Ruby section that when you approach them, they sort of cower in fear, and it's really fucking funny. There's also this cool little flourish that the game does whenever you pick up one of the keys. And the classic bass notes when you're sneaking around is so good. There's so many little things that activate the dopamine for me, like this weird little cough at the start of Mugshot's cutscene, and the Panda King's death rattle. Sorry, knockout noise. The simplicity of a lot of the character models also allows for more expressive animation work. Every enemy has a victory animation that plays whenever they kill you or take off one of your lucky charms, with my favorites being the trenchcoat dogs in the Mugshot section, or the giant mosquitoes in the Miss Ruby section that suck up Sly's blood, get sick, and then spew it out. Rating board loopholes, am I right? There's these weird looking squid tree looking things that segment into different body parts that try to attack you. There's these purple looking guys that flip around and wave a giant staff. There's mountain apes that launch their own children down a hill so that they become giant hostile snowballs. And there's card-dealing Dalmatians that throw handfuls of cards at you. The game is designed so that you're always moving forward, disposing of enemies in a single hit, so their personality has to be displayed within a pretty short window of time. Bosses are only seen in person near the end of their section, so the entirety of the zone is used to build them up in different artistic forms until their in-game model is revealed, creating a larger-than-life image for a lot of the antagonists.
Bring it on!
Larger than life in this case because some of the in-game boss models do look pretty rough. Even the map screens have a lot of personality to them. Every time you select a level, it zooms over to its location on the map and displays a brief simplified look at one of the more striking pieces of imagery from the level. The first racing level shows the hot dog stand that Murray wants to eat at.
Quick snack!
Unseen Foe shows the tower that you'll be climbing for most of the level, and the fire down below shows the pool of magma that you'll face in the midsection. The small scale of the levels combined with these sort of zoom-in reveals of the map screen really make you feel like you're going into every possible building and section of the villain's compound. It may only take around an hour to explore every zone, but by the end you feel as if you've discovered every aspect of the villain's plans and the means for them to realize it. From the cutscenes of Sly reading up on biographies, to the intercom announcements.
Attention, valued employee. It has come to my attention that a thief is loose somewhere inside the firework production facility. Please do your part to pitch in by killing this intruder on sight. Thank you, that is all.
To Bentley explaining the purpose of every area.
Eureka! We're in the engine room!
You feel as if you know the villain's whole deal as soon as it's time to meet them face to face for the boss fight. Because Sly can die in one hit, the boss fights are primarily about memorization and having a basic understanding of their moveset.
I want to see how well you pay attention.
What do you mean?
Each fight is entirely different from one another, with each exhibiting completely different means of dealing and avoiding hits. With Raleigh the Frog, he has to deflate before you can hit him. Mugshot's fight involves spinning around a bunch of mirrors to focus heat into these giant crystals.
My beautiful gun is destroyed! Good thing I got a spare upstairs.
Ms. Ruby is essentially a
Simon Says
that gets progressively faster. Panda King is all about memorizing his vocalizations.
Fiery wheel, palms of thunder, booming chop.
And the entirety of Clockwork Zone feels like this big event, with quick challenging levels that flow into one another, until this big 3-phase fight involving dodging fucking circles and weaving past this tight little gauntlet of lasers and projectiles in order to bash his face in.
Redirect energy. Cooper! You will never be rid of me.
I love how genuinely sinister Clockwork is.
You sentimental fool. Empathy has always been the downfall of the Cooper clan.
He gets hinted at throughout the entire game, and once you meet him, he's this giant metal owl that has hated the Cooper lineage so much that he's spent centuries replacing his body with robot parts in an effort to terrorize the Coopers throughout history. He's got some surprisingly cold lines for a kid's game.
Sly Cooper, you have escaped my gas chamber and destroyed my death ray. Remarkable. You Coopers always find a way to beat me. Revenge is the prime ingredient in the fountain of youth. I've kept myself alive for hundreds of years with a steady diet of jealousy and hate. Enough, Sly Cooper. It ends here. I will finish you like I finished your father.
It's stuff like this that gets to the root of my biggest problems with Sly 4. It's not a bad game, especially for newcomers to the franchise, but I feel like there's a fundamental misunderstanding in how it deals with tone and presentation compared to the original trilogy, the first two games especially. The graphics are great, the animations are incredibly fluid and honestly kind of impressive at times, and everyone has this friendly, upbeat kind of attitude. The music is composed with this full orchestra, and a lot of it can be genuinely great listening. But in terms of preserving that kind of rough, twitchy, somewhat dark attitude of the originals,
it is doomed to failure.
Also, a lot of the character designs are really fucking ugly.
Look how they massacred my boy.
Carmelita especially, Jesus Christ. Motherfucker looks like something out of a post-Naughty Dog Crash Bandicoot game. It goes from feeling like a game series that was based off of a comic book to a series that feels like it was based off of a languid CGI show a la Pac-Man and the Ghostly Adventures or Sonic Boom. I find the characters in general just try too hard to make jokes.
Okay, you both remember the plan, right?
Of course! My mind is like a steel cap!
That's trap, big guy.
In the earlier games, a lot of the jokes lied in the game just being dark, absurd, and vaguely adult-coded. But in this one, there's a lot more focus on making the characters act more like pleasant mascots than characters in anthropomorphic form.
For starters, why don't you try defacing all those posters of the sheriff around town? That ought to put a burr under his saddle. Get it? Because we're in the Old West?
Yes!
It sucks because, just in terms of raw gameplay, it mostly delivers on the promise of a next-gen Sly game. It's just that even with an E10 rating, it feels meant for audiences younger than the E-rated games that started the series. In other words, it commits the cardinal sin of children's entertainment. Media that's designed with the intent of being just kid stuff can be just as dangerous of a concept as products designed to be disposable after a few years. After those early years of childhood, most people have no urge to go back to these kinds of things because they were designed with the intent that kids will eat up mindless juvenile entertainment. I used to have content like that in my life too, every kid does. But last time I checked, I'm not clawing my way to see Chicken Little and Dougal like I was as a kid. Shit's fucking poison. Hell, I'd argue that even games like the Borderlands franchise, which all have 17+ ratings, focus more on appealing to edgy kids than any other demographic because of how mindless and juvenile the writing is. Trust me, I played the first 2 games like crazy far before I met the age rating, and found it harder and harder to tolerate them the more my age passed the M rating. For the most part, the original Sly trilogy seems to know the difference between dumbing something down for kids and simplifying something to make it more readable for children. Subject matter and themes can be a bit mature compared to other children's media once given a bit of thought, but it's never approached in a way that a kid can't understand and enjoy. Every once in a while there's a joke or a reference that could go over their head, but the overall experience remains accessible and enjoyable for all ages. It's works like this that allow people to re-experience them differently as they grow. I'm sure as a kid this game was just about
some scrawny rat with a stick
getting all the keys, but as an adult it really allows me to enjoy the game's inspirations, mood, character writing, and aesthetics to their fullest. It's a gem that I hope people take, legally or otherwise, because if there's one thing that this game taught me, it's that stealing from the bad guys is the fucking best. Hey everybody, thanks for sticking to the end of the video. I had a lot of fun making this one, so I hope you enjoy it. If you're wondering why I didn't talk too much about Sly 3, it's nothing like too harsh against the game. I like it quite a bit, but there's a couple aspects that I have problems with in Sly 3. The first being that it's a bit more gimmicky than the first 2 games. There's a lot of stuff that they just throw in, like it's very much a, compared to the first 2, it's very much like an everything but the kitchen sink type of game in terms of like things that you can do and stuff. There's like so many different mini games and things like that, and for the most part they're good, but every once in a while there's a one that just falls completely flat, because while you're playing Sly 3 you kind of get the impression that Sucker Punch was like, this is the last one we're gonna do, like we're kind of running out of ideas. The other one is that they start to get into like relationship drama shit, and I honestly can't stand that when it feels like kind of artificial. And it doesn't go too far in Sly 3, but there's a couple points where it like risks going too far. Talking specifically about that whole bit during the pirate section where Bentley starts to get a little jealous of Sly because he's worried that Penelope likes him more than she likes like Bentley. Like I was never really huge into that. Like I didn't mind Penelope as a character. I couldn't stand her in Sly 4 obviously, but I also couldn't stand like most of the characters in Sly 4 because the writing shit. I actually don't mind a lot of the newer characters. I think the Guru's really funny. I think Dimitri has a couple really funny moments. I wasn't a huge fan of how they tried to like redeem the Panda King. Because there's this whole section in Sly 3 where he becomes like a playable character and stuff, and he works for the Cooper gang and stuff, but there's a really big question on whether or not he deserves to be redeemed, because like the whole thing about the enemy, like the bad guys in Sly 1 is they're all like cartoonishly bad. Like he's like, Panda King's like burying villages in snow and like killing a ton of people. It's the whole like God of War thing where it's like, does this person really deserve a redemption arc? Aside from that, just playing through and getting footage for the sequels just makes me want to play Sly 2 again. So there's a high chance that that's gonna be the next game I'm gonna stream, because like the more I gathered footage for that game, I'm like, God, I need to play this game again because it's so good. I love Sly 2. Aside from that, I'd actually really like to know what everybody's favorite game from this console generation is. You know, like GameCube, Xbox, PS2. So if you'd like, you can leave a comment down below just to let me know what kind of games you really like from this era, because this was a very formative generation for me, and I'd love to hear the kind of important games that other people played during that time. I think it'd be pretty fun. I've already got the next couple episodes planned out, so they should be on their way eventually. But aside from that, yeah, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll see you later.